No, yes, understood the article. Now there are certain points because of sheer, I mean, your economy syllabus has not completed, and there are a lot of things in read between the lines. So first of all, we need to understand certain terms to appreciate this article in a much better fashion. Now, why this national monetization plan or pipeline? First of all, what is the need? If you understand that, then you understand the rest of the article very easily. Now, any economy will have two engines. One engine is public sector, that is nothing but government. The other engine is private sector, right? So these are the two engines. Just imagine Indian economy like an aeroplane, right? So one engine is government, the other engine is private sector. Now, one of the keywords that is mentioned in this article is though banks are flush with money. That means, normally speaking, if a private investment, let's say L&T company, Tata, Ambani, or anyone wants to big invest like 30,000 crores, 40,000 crores, they will go to banks, right? That is the most common thing they will do. But banks are fully loaded with money. Nobody is taking loans. So banks have tons and tons of money. The problem is there is no demand. That means people are not purchasing like they used to. So that is why these companies are not furthering their investment, right? If you remember the Maggie example, 100 packets to 150 packets, this is growth, right? 100 packets to 150 packets, that is growth. So with the existing capacity, with the existing infrastructure, they can produce 100 packets easily. Not even 100 are being sold, only 90 or 80 being sold. So why do they need more money to expand it to 150? That in that sense, okay, leave it. Right. So that means when private sector is not even expanding from 100, like there is no need for expanding to 100 to 150. In such situation, there is something called as business cycle, right? This you must be knowing. Boom, recession, depression, recovery. So economy is more or less in this position. We are here. Indian economy is here. If you remember that K-shaped recovery, V-shaped recovery, we are recovering from recession. This is business cycle. That means in normal time, if it is a boom, that means economy is on full force. 150 Maggie packets are needed. My existing capacity is 100. So I will work on increasing the capacity. Right now in recession, my existing capacity is 900. My consumption is only 90. So why do I need extra money? I already am in some kind of loss. In such situations, right, the best person to invest more money is government of India or government of that particular state. So the crux being, whenever economy is in slowdown, whenever economy is in recession, this is what John Maynard Keynes says, whenever the economy is in recession, right, it's the responsibility of the state to pump money into the market. Only when you pump money into the market, okay, the economy will recover. Now, pumping money can be of two kinds. That is revenue expenditure, other one is capital expenditure, right? Revenue expenditure means Narega, Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana, like Raitu Bandhu scheme of Telangana. All these are pumping money in revenue mode. That means I will give them. People might either use it for agriculture, people might use it for consuming alcohol, people might use it for going to movies or getting their daughters married, whatever, sons married, right? So in every way, it is no guarantee that the amount that I'm investing will have spillover effects. If somebody is drinking alcohol, probably I will get some tax. Apart from that, there is no long-term usage. But when it comes to capital expenditure, let's say if I construct roads, if I construct airports, what will happen? There will be a lot of spillover effects, right? Just imagine if I have to construct a road, what will happen? The real estate market in and around that road will increase. More people will buy vehicles, mechanics, consumption of petrol, transportation. The spillover effects are manifold. Whenever this house is constructed, it will employ 10 more people. Like that, if I just construct a road between point A and point B, Yes, just imagine a bullet train between Hyderabad and Bengaluru. 1.5 hours is the time that will take from Hyderabad to Bengaluru. What will happen? You don't have to, worry in the traffic jams and all those things, right? The transportation increases. The entire infrastructure in between will increase. So these are all called as spillover effects. So that is exactly what Government of India is trying to do. Government of India is trying to plan in capital expenditure. So National Modernization Plan is all about capital expenditure. Okay, so that is the first story you need to understand. Next, what will happen when I pump money into the economy? When I pump money into the economy, production will increase, right? Consumption will increase, because when production increases, more and more people will be employed. They will have wages, or they will increase their wages. A new person will get salary, existing person will have better salary, profits will increase, which will again be invested in the economy, and taxes will be invested. But one small disadvantage here is, if I pump revenue expenditure, if I'm the government, revenue expenditure is directly this. I'm giving free money to the people, more or less. That means I'm creating a lot of demand. Okay, this entire cycle is bypassed. So that is why this particular line, only these two things will be there in revenue expenditure, right? I know it's bit it might be a little bit of confusing, or a lot of confusion and all those things. I am trying to give you the holistic story. If you understand the larger story, then this article becomes cakewalk. Clear? So the first and most important thing government should do is pump money into the market, because private sector is not interested, because there is no demand. I have to create demand. How do I create demand? By pumping lakhs and lakhs of crores of money into capital expenditure. Just imagine thousands of kilometers of road being laid in the country, right? Throughout the country. So that will have a lot of spillover effects, and overall Indian economy will grow. So that is government's understanding of present situation. Now, there are other articles, there are other points. So this NMP, National Monetization Plan, is trying to create infrastructure. Very good. How is it trying to create? Either through PPP model or through InvITs, Infrastructure Investment Trusts. Now, what is PPP? PPP means private-public partnership. The land will be of the governments. Okay. The land will be of the Government of India, but entire administration, who will take care of entire administration? The private sector will take care of the entire administration. So owner is still government, but the rest of the activity is done by that private person. Risk is his, reward is also his, more or less. But what is government getting in the long run? Overall economy is getting boom. When economy gets boom, remember this will happen. Taxes. We are $3 trillion economy, right? If Government of India is getting, let's say, 14 lakh crores as taxes, when India becomes $10 trillion economy, just imagine the amount of tax that India can collect. So that is the government's interest in the long run. The bigger the economy, more taxes, the better the administration. So to create that kind of infrastructure, I need to take the help of private players. So that's one theme, public-private partnership. I will provide the notes, don't worry. Then there is InvITs model. InvITs model means, let's imagine GMR company. GMR company have airports, road construction, let's say some building construction. For all these three things, they need money, right? They will bulk, or they will bundle this entire product, airport plus road plus building, and they will say, I need 3,000 crores, right? And this 3,000 crores can be invested by public, LIC of India, insurance companies. Okay, so all these are long term. That means for 20 years. So you are buying this 3,000 crore, or you are investing this InvIT. InvIT is like a mutual fund policy. It's like an insurance. Okay, you pay some money, you get some certificates, just like a bond. So I'm not going by technical definitions. I'm giving you the story. So this 3,000 crores, these people will give to the GMR company, and GMR company will give in return a bond. After 20 years, I will return your whatever 3,000 crores plus some profits or something. Right? So it's like a bond. You remember that Vijay Mallya example, right? Yeah, in the same way, it's a simple bond. Now, this is again hypothetical. That means it may work, it may not work. Why? Right? InvIT or PPP project is there from point A to point B. Okay, everything sounds so good on the paper, but in reality, what happens? Yes, then any of these things can happen in between, right? Land acquisition issues might happen, court issues might happen, yes, pandemics, natural calamities, okay, force majeure issues. I mean, that is act of God, all the natural claims. Yes, then environmental protection issues. So when any of these things come into the picture, the 3,000 crore project you planned will pump or jump to 7,500 crores within a span of 5 years. So every year delay led from 3,000 to 7,500 crores. Okay, then this plan that you are supposed to invest these 3,000 crores in all these things, and they will have spillover effects, and you will pay to the bond owner, is gone. Why? Now, first of all, just to complete the project, you need 3,000 crores. Sorry, 4,500 crores more. Apart from that, you need to complete the airport, you need to complete the road, you need to complete the building. Yes, then the spillover effects have to happen. Then you will get profit. Only that profit can be given to the person, right? I'm just telling you, it need not happen. It's not like compulsory this will happen. It might happen. Then that will lead to problem. So we should have contingency for all these things. We should have proper planning for all these things. Then this entire monetization plan will work accordingly. So even the best of the plan, let's say government has worked on all these things, still some new issue will come for sure, right? So that does not demotivate or discourage us to not invest in InvITs or PPP models. What I'm trying to tell you is there are a lot of pitfalls in this entire journey of recovering the Indian economy as well. Right? So the same problems that InvITs are facing, PPP will also face. Let's say L&T company. L&T company is laying a metro in Hyderabad. Right? Some probable religious issue might come out. People don't want to give up the land. Then land acquisition issue might come out. Then you have to take a U bend, which is like 1,000 crores extra. Who is going to bear that 1,000 crores? So there are a lot of practical problems, but India is still trying to overcome all these problems. So that is the major criticism of his reasoning. That is the PPP, and the other one is InvITs. Okay. So this is InvITs, then the PPP model. Now, he suggests instead of these two things, why not go for debt monetization? So what is debt monetization? In simple terms, RBI will pump new money into the market, right? So and market will bonds are from government. So What is the problem here? When RBI is pumping more and more money into the market, two things will happen. One is inflation. The other point is crowding out. So under normal times, let's imagine hypothetically, there is only one bank in the country and it has 1,000 crores. Okay. Interest rate. So in normal time, if there is only one bank in an economy, it has 1,000 crores to give as loans after SLR, CRR, you remember all those things, right? Basic requirements and all those things. You have only 1,000 crores to give to the market. You are giving it at 10% or 10% interest rate. Now, government of India will come and tell, I will take 750 crores. I will come and take 750 crores at, let's say, whatever percentage, or even at 10%, again, hypothetically speaking. Now, what is left? Only 250 crores is left. So 250 crores for the entire market. So the entire market has to fight for 250 crores. So will the interest rate go up or come down? Demand is more, supply is less. When demand is higher, supply is less, automatically interest rates will go up. D by S formula. Too many, I mean, the entire market is chasing behind less amount of money. But if there is 1,000 crores and no takers, right now, that is the exact situation, right? There is 1,000 crores in the market, but nobody is taking the loans. So what will happen to the interest rates? Banks will beg people, please take loan, please take loan. For you, I will give at 9.5%. You know, you want 700 crores? Okay, I will give at 7% only, but please take loan. Why? This is locked up capital for the bank. It's not gaining any money or interest for the bank, right? Only when banks rotate the money, the multiplier effect is there. That is when banks will make profits. I hope all of you have read that multiplier concept of banking, right? So that is crowding out effect. That means government is coming in and pushing away the private sector. Right? This is government, this is private sector. So only less space is left for the private sector. That is crowding out effect. Again, it's not so relevant in the present day's world because there are many ways for the private sector to generate money as well. And at the same time, government is not borrowing mindlessly like 750 crores. It's not borrowing 75%, right? Hardly it might borrow 12 or 13%, which does not make any difference whatsoever to the sorry, to the economy. But in theory, this is all good, but in reality, no government want to enter this particular territory. Right now, why I am discussing this particular article as a story, because this is more useful for you in prelims rather than in mains. Okay, the mains questions will be more or less focused on infrastructure investment things and public private partnership. What are the reasons of success or failure of public private partnership? What are the various types of public private partnership? Build, own, operate, transfer, build, lease, transfer, and there are more. These are just examples. Okay, what is infrastructure investment trust? What is the advantages? So the mains questions will be in these directions. Please pick, give enough attention to the PDF that I will share after the class, right? And coming to debt monetization, it's just for prelims bit. What will happen if debt monetization happens? Will inflation increase? It may or may not, but chances are very high that inflation will increase. What is crowding out effect? Yes. So these are the simple questions that will come into the discussion. Now, there is one more keyword that is mentioned in the article. I hope most of you know what is disinvestment, what is privatization. I don't have to explain the basic terms, right? Disinvestment means government giving up some amount of share. If I'm 100% owner, I have given up 10% share, so I'm still 90% owner. That is disinvestment. But if my ownership comes less than 51%, that means if I fall into the 49% bracket, then it's more or less privatization. Private means you are no longer owner. Disinvestment means up to 51%, whatever amount of you want to disinvest, you can disinvest. Next. That is a major theme of this particular article. Why is more important rather than what he is saying. Why government of India is so invested in capital expenditure right now? Because of business cycle, right? Are you referring any other textbook apart from SAR's class notes for economy? Okay. Again, I don't know what sir has mentioned. Anyhow, if you are interested in taking any other book, my personal recommendation will always be Ramesh Singh. Right. I hope you at least understood why we are investing in this capital expenditure concept. Indian economy is in a recession. It's slowing down. So we need to pump more money. More money is always good for the economy. Now, there is one more article which is about criminalization of politics in Hindu, right? Now, can anyone tell me what is the role and importance of political parties in India? Are political parties pressure groups? It makes sure there is democracy and there is no dictatorship, okay? For providing different welfare schemes. Aspiration of people be satisfied with representatives. Okay. So simple questions. Are political parties pressure groups? First of all, what is pressure group? They form governments. They represent various sections of society. Right. So what kind of democracy does India have? Very good. Representative democracy. So in GS paper 2, there is a concept called as pressure groups. In Lakshmikant also, there is a chapter called as pressure groups. If time permits, if you're free, at least 30 minutes or 40 minutes, you can read it randomly just for fun. It's very good chapter for understanding the society in a much broader fashion. Now, as rightly pointed out, political parties represent or political parties form the government of India. Now, if you see the story of India, more or less it was ruled by Congress. That is why Rajni Kothari rightly pointed it as a Congress style of governance or Congress form of government. That means single party governments. One party is dominating the entire country. That is what Rajni Kothari mentions. Presently, after 2014, BJP is doing the same thing. Single party dominance. All the other parties have been more or less pushed to the margins of the democracy. But collectively, all of them have one vested interest. Whenever it comes to their own welfare, whenever it comes to the political parties' welfares, okay, it doesn't matter which shape and size you belong to, all of you are one. Not only in the Right to Information Act, but also in Foreign Contribution Regulation Act amendment also, all the political parties came together to prove that ideological differences are one thing, but when it comes to their own welfare, their own protection, right, all of them are one and the same. Now, in reality, political parties are democracy and politics and your social life are very closely intertwined. That means if you belong to a political party or if a particular political party is governing this country, the progress of the nation is also interlinked to the party's progress. If the party is having regressive ideas, right, nation will also slow down. Yes, and if the party is not transparent, or if the party is not promoting transparency and accountability and all these things, okay, then we cannot expect them to govern also in the same way. Yes, as rightly pointed out in this particular article, think about it. When BJP came into the power in 2014, what was the backdrop? 2G scam, right? Probably were in school or something, I don't know. When BJP came into power, 2G scam happened. That means they came under one thing, that we will promote transparency, accountability, right? Corruption free government. Yes, they will say they will remove corruption free. Now, in that way, they are 100% true that Prime Minister Modi does not have any bribe or any corruption in his entire last 7 years tenure. No cabinet member has been accused officially of or proved with corruption charges. So to their credit, that is true. But you know, Chanakya, he said around 2500 years ago in his treatise, Ardhashastra, there are 40 types of corruptions. 2500 years ago, he mentioned that, you know, there are 40 types of corruptions. That was when administration was very simple and it was dictatorial. Just imagine in democracy, in one department, probably there are 40 types of corruptions and there are 40,000 different types of corruptions. Corruption not only means money, corruption can be in kind, corruption can be in cash. This is the most dangerous kind of corruption, right? So the moral fabric of the democracy is hurted in different ways. Again, I'm not saying that I'm talking about BJP. I'm saying in general, corruption can be of 10,000 ways. So Modi is Mr. Clean, no doubt about it. But that may not be clear about the entire democratic setup. And the second thing is transparency and accountability. How do we promote transparency and accountability? Right to Information Act and CIC. You know, only when Supreme Court forced the present government, after 5 years, they have appointed a not CIC, Lokpal. Right? Sorry, my bad. In that way, if the party itself is not so willing about transparency and openness, okay, the governance may also say the same thing, right? And next thing, they don't have to worry about anything. They are all clean parties, right? Whenever we talk about parties, what is the biggest thing they can hide? They can hide the money they are receiving from. Electoral bond scheme is there. So why do they prefer not to come under RTI? It's a mystery, because it will reflect on the governance part as well. Now, that is why just imagine Congress has given ticket to Vijay Mallya or something like that happened. Then I might file an RTI. Why go for a criminal? Why not go for a clean person? That may or may not come under the purview of RTI. That will lead to a lot of confusion, right? Or I might file an RTI saying how many BJP MPs or Congress MPs provided oxygen cylinders during this? Okay, because he's a member of BJP. Unnecessary or lot of complications might be created. So that is why political parties are not so interested in opening up of the transparency system. But even bigger problem we have to notice in this particular article is lack of respect for Supreme Court of India. Whenever Supreme Court says something, if you are not following it, okay, it is contempt of court. Political parties are willingly going for contempt of court. So that is even bigger threat to democracy. That means you are no longer respecting Supreme Court. So for all these reasons, it's better to bring political parties under Right to Information Act, and you can limit the amount of information that can be asked. You know, right. And coming to electoral bond scheme, it's a sub judice. That means there is a case pending against electoral bonds. As of now, Supreme Court has given the blessing to the electoral bond scheme, but it has a lot of problems. Yes, contrary to popular belief, it does not actually promote transparency and accountability. And the present party in power is getting around 90% of funds through electoral bonds scheme. Right. So it's a useful article in GS paper 2, but major focus should be on these two things. One is about Supreme Court judgments, the other one is Right to Information Act. Okay. Any doubts from that particular article? Right. Next, there is one more article regarding the Paris climate change. It is the same argument that India has to change its targets. So we will see how India has progressed. Whatever I am highlighting in yellow are India's INDC targets, India's nationally determined contributions. Remember the term, nationally determined contributions. That means Paris Agreement is a voluntary agreement. India's intended nationally determined contribution. Nobody forced India to choose these targets. India has voluntarily chosen. So that is the first most important point of Paris Agreement. It's voluntary. Nobody will pressurize you to set this amount of targets. Okay, but once if you are set these targets and announce them officially, then they will be supervised or not. Clear? So what are the targets? First one is we will reduce the greenhouse gases. How much? By 30 to 35% from 2005 level. So in 2005 level, if that is base mark 100, so by 2030, I will produce only 70 or 65% of greenhouse gases in relation to 2005 level. So that is what India has promised. Next, what is the second INDC? You might be surprised. This is a 10 marker question in mains directly. What are India's INDCs? Direct 10 marker, 2017 mains, GS paper 3. Okay. Next, second target is to reduce or to move away from fossil energies by 40%. Fossil means oil, coal, etc. We will move away to that by 40%. This is a one more big promise. And what is the last promise that India has made? We will create additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of additional forest and tree cover. So we will increase our forest covers, which will absorb carbon. This is known as carbon sequestration, right? Plants will absorb a lot of carbon dioxide. If you see the three yellow points, all three are interlinked. Either it's greenhouse gases or fossil energy or carbon sink, all of them are interlinked. Now, The most recent energy mix. Energy mix means how India is producing its power, energy capacity. If you see coal or thermal is around 60%. The rest together are around almost 40%. So India is reaching the target of this. We will reduce the fossil fuel energy by 40%, and India is keeping its promise. And you will be happy to know India is the only G20 country in the G20 country which is actually keeping its INDC promises. No other country is even close. So that shows a commitment of the present governments to promote renewable energy. So we want to reduce our dependency on this, and we want to increase our dependency on these things: hydro, nuclear, and renewable energy. Solar and others. Right? This is clear. Coal, we have to move away. We have to move towards renewable energy. Now, as all of you know, I have yesterday itself, I have told you hydro energy dams, dam construction is only as good as not the ecological destruction. I'm moving towards renewable energy, but I'm destroying forests. Right? Then this will be antithesis to the third target. I want to move towards hydropower without destroying more number of forests. So that is sustainable development. All of you understood? Clear so far? Just imagine the dependency of India on coal. 52.6%, 57% of India's power comes only from coal. Right? And still we have miles to go. India is still just a $3 trillion economy. We have to become $10 trillion economy. And we are not even getting funds from different countries, developed countries, either in hydro, nuclear, or renewable energy. If we get more and more funds, more technology from Western countries, from Japan, from USA, from Europe, or any other developed country, see the progress India can make. So that is how we will grow collectively. Next, one small thing, when you read this particular PDF, don't try to do PhD and all those things. Just remember the names. For example, what are the steps taken by Government of India to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? We are promoting electric vehicles, very straightforward answer. We are promoting national biofuel policy. Yes, ethanol blending. That means along with petrol, 20% ethanol will be there. 20% ethanol, 80% petrol. That is 1 liter of fuel. So the more ethanol blending, the less the pollution. Bharat stage 6 emission norms. All these things are being implemented by the government. Right? National Hydro Energy Mission. For 2021 prelims, this is a very, very important question, most expected. India Coal Action Plan. So what does hydrogen do? Hydrogen is considered as a clean energy. It does not leave any greenhouse gases. Very, very minimal in comparison to petrol. Right? In the same way, to reduce or to move away from fossil fuel, what did Government of India do? Government of India kept a target of 175 gigawatt of energy from solar. I mean, within that, there is 100 gigawatt of solar, wind, hydro, all these targets are there. So that's a huge amount of promise. And Prime Minister Modi increased it to 450 gigawatts by 2030. Yes. Next, for increasing additional forests, we are promising on the land degradation neutrality. That means we will restore totally useless land like near desert or totally fallow land into a forest land by 2030. How much? 26 million hectares. So all these steps, these are just examples. You can add at least 3 or 4 more examples in each and every dimension. I'm just giving you a brief idea that we are working on all these areas apart from what is mentioned in the article. So it's not correct to say that India is not working on its renewable energy promises or clean energy promises. What India needs more is funds and technology. If there is more funds, we will move towards rapid electric vehicles, more quickly move towards electric vehicles. If we have better technology, we will promote electric vehicles. We will, if we have more funds, we will build more metros in more cities, right? So all these steps can be taken by government of India to reduce the carbon emissions. So if the world is so bothered about India's emissions, they should not pressurize Indian government to even increase their INDC targets, which are already very good, but they should give more money and technology. That is the most important thing you need to remember. Clear? INDC targets and what government of India is doing. It's a mains answer. You can write a 10 marker easily from this simple PDF. Okay. So yesterday also we have seen an article about rape. Today also there is an article about marital rape. So what is the difference between these two things? Marriage. Okay, very good. Thank you, Bhaskar. Rape of wife by husband is called as marital rape. Does anyone know this concept? Okay. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. I mean, sometimes the simplest and most obvious argument is the right answer. Okay, it's a concept called as mental model. Just remember, Occam's razor means it's a very simple argument. Okay, pure common sense. Consent is important. Consent is universal, and it does not affect by temporal dimension or your personal relationship status. Right? That means you are in a living relationship. X and Y are in living relationship. Okay. So it's not a one-time contract that, okay, once we agree to be in a living relationship, right? The right to have sex, a right to have, yes, the right to have sex is forever, right? That is a very wrong assumption. And courts should not see only this one-time thing. Okay, she is his girlfriend. They were living for 3 years. Now suddenly she is coming and claiming a rape. Okay, in the same way, marital rape is about husband. Just because you are married to someone does not mean, you can have sex whenever you feel like. You need to take the consent of that particular person. And please remember, it's a two-way street. We are not only talking about women, but very rarely we see rape being accused from a man, but that is also equally true. It's a two-way street. Every person has that independence to choose whether to say yes or no. Yes is yes, no is no. So the power of consent is taken away in a marriage for once and for all. Right? If you are married once, there is no such thing as consent. Yes. And if you go and talk to Indian men, I mean, again, I'm not generalizing, at least 40-50% maybe, they don't even understand what we are talking about. Right? Once you are married, that's it. So before that, before going into marital agreement, I will tell you how patriarchal we were. Joseph Shine case, Joseph Shine versus Union of India case. Okay, this is about adultery. Right? Husband, wife. Okay, the wife had an affair with the lover, right? Then this is adultery, obviously, because they are in a wedding relationship. So she is having a extramarital affair. Okay, whatever your morals and ethics apart from this, Indian law back then said this: if the husband go to the police station and file a case, okay, it is adultery. If the husband says it's okay, then it's not a case. Apart from husband, nobody can file a case. Right? Point number 3, opposite is not true. That means if a husband have a lover, if a husband is having an extramarital affair, okay, wife does not have the right to file a adultery case. It's only one-way street. Okay, okay, just understand. I have read this in a newspaper article. Some article writer wrote this like this. I have purchased my sofa. Okay, I have purchased a fridge. Yeah, it's okay to use my fridge or sofa. I don't have any issue. Then it's not adultery. But if I use someone else's sofa or fridge, I don't have a problem. It's a very simple analogy or a bad analogy. But the thing is, wife or woman has been reduced to a thing. 100% right with the husband. So that is what was removed in 2018 in Joseph Shine versus Union of India case. There is no such thing as adultery because she's an adult woman with her consent. If she wants to have an extramarital affair, then that is for you both to decide in a domestic fashion. It is no longer a criminal case, right? Now just think about the same thing. The very powerful words used in the article. I totally appreciate the article writer. Would not amount to rape. It's very clearly understood. Now, one more point you need to very carefully understand is this. This is a court of law, not a court of justice. What is the difference between court of law and court of justice? In court of justice, if you are an educated person, you should understand that consent is a very important thing, right? So if she did not say yes, okay, then he proceeded to rape her, then he should be punished. This is justice. According to at least some of you are those who agree with this point of view, there is a concept called as marital law. But what is law saying? Law is saying this is not rape. Case closed, done, dusted. So whatever is law is correct. Okay, it has nothing to do with justice. This is a court of law. This is not a court of justice. So that is why we say law is a determinant of ethics and morals in the society. If law says something is correct, done, dusted. Did you understand this particular quote? This is a court of law, not a court of justice. Yes. Right. So I will share the PDF. Don't worry, you will have time to read this particular articles and all those things. But the thing you need to understand is this. Societal morality. I hope you remember societal morality. Societal morality means society will say something is good or bad. Indian society more or less has understood or agreed upon silently that once you are married, there is no such thing as bad. Everything is good. Okay. Now what this particular author is trying to say is that's a very outdated concept of understanding the society or human beings or human life. Women are just like any other human beings like men, right? They also have feelings. They also have a right to say yes or no. So they should always have the choice to say yes or no. If she says yes, it's good. If she says no, it's bad. So this exists. This is constitutional morality. Constitution says everybody is equal. So there exists good and bad. But according to society, once you are married, there is only good. There is no such thing as bad. No matter what, if he's a drunkard, if he beats you, you have to reform him. That is the most stupid argument. You have to reform him. You have to change him, mold him through persuasion. He will become a better human being, right? But you have to live with him. The society tells the same thing. Parents tell the same thing. Law says the same thing more or less. right? When everybody is saying the same thing, then you will also accept it. Clear? So I totally appreciate the author's point of view. It's 100% bang on. She did not mince any words. She literally yeah, touched up all upon, and she wrote a 13 pages thesis, 13 page essay in the same topic in Oxford University website, I think recently, law journal. So why marital rape as in Indian definition and all those things. But simply understand, I will share the PDF. If you have any questions, do let me know. But I hope you understood what is societal morality and constitutional morality. Again, remember, if you don't appreciate or understand anything, it does not matter. Why? It's the ability of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. If you're a part and parcel of Indian society, or if your morals or your family upbringing or whatever says, this is a wrong thing, yes, husband have all the rights in the world, then you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. Okay. But for common sense sake, at least act like you accept it. Why? That is the ability of an educated mind. You can entertain an idea without accepting it. Slowly, 6 months down the line, you might actually appreciate what this article is all about. Because for 23 years, 24 years, you are born and brought up in a particular society which says this is correct, this is wrong. Then suddenly someone comes and says there is something higher called as constitutional morality. We may or may not accept it overnight. So give it time to sink in, think from other point of view, right? What if you are the person who is locking the door because you don't want to be raped, but still that person on the other side of the door is your husband? So what will you go through? If that is something that you can empathize, sympathize, or understand, then this article will make more sense. If you are like any other person with zero clue, it's totally fine. Give it time and read this PDF. All the definitions are very important. And Joseph Shine, Navte Singh Johar, Puttaswamy, Aruna Shanbag case, or Anuradha Basin case, all these cases are something that should be on your fingertips, right? So any questions on this particular article?